Hello, boys and girls. This week's lesson is on keystone species, okay? And we're going to learn the difference between a keystone and a foundation species. So let's backtrack for a second and see why this is important. So remember a couple of weeks ago, we did this worksheet here, okay? And your version had a completed food web on it, okay? And we had these scenarios, right? And our first scenario was telling you something like this. There are types of pathogenic fungi that can attack living amphibians, such as frogs. It's a chitid fungus, okay? For each of the following organisms, describe how each organism population might be affected, okay? And then your job was to tell me that if the frog had this fungus, how would the snake be affected? Okay, how would the grasshopper population be affected? How might our producer population be affected? Okay, so when we're talking about something like a keystone species, what we're really trying to discover is how does one species affect every single other species in an ecosystem. So we have talked about this a little bit, but now we're going to focus just a little more. So when we have this archway, okay, this kind of structure has been around for thousands of years, maybe longer. Why? Because it works. And why does it work? Well, because it starts with a foundation, okay? Every building that doesn't have a proper foundation will fall, right? So it needs to have some kind of support system, all right? And then it has a keystone. And in these archways, the keystone is the thing that sort of holds it all together, okay? Without this keystone, everything on the sides would fall down, okay? So let's walk through this very quick little slideshow, okay? And we're gonna look at some species here. Well, there's the sea star. So we've been talking about sea stars and the sea star wasting disease, and now we're going to talk about how that wasting disease might be affecting the whole rest of the intertidal zone, okay? So is it a keystone or is it a foundation? Well, the sea star, and this particular breed, species rather, is called Pisaster ocraceus, okay? And it is a keystone species. So this sea star is a keystone species, all right? It's an efficient predator of this mussel, Mytilus californicus, all right? Which means this guy eats a lot of these. So it reduces an abundance of that californicus, allowing other macroinvertebrates to persist, which basically this is telling you the more mussels that the sea star eats, the more organisms overall have a chance of making it in an intertidal zone. So this sea star keeps the mussel population in check. Okay, it keeps it down to a certain population so that the mussel can't take over the whole intertidal zone. And that way, other species can come along and live there as well. So the starfish being present means that there's going to be a diverse intertidal community. So all because of what this guy likes to eat, that means that a bunch of species have an opportunity to be part of this intertidal ecosystem. Now, let's look at another one, or let's look at the research as to who found this out. So this guy, Dr. Robert T. Payne, he discovered this back in the 60s and into the 70s, okay? So let's focus on this chart here. So here's the number of species that are present in an intertidal zone. When there's a lot of sea stars, okay, then there's a lot of other species. There are at least 15 to 20 species present throughout all these years from 1963 to 1973. When there are sea stars present, there's at least 15 to 20 other invertebrate species living in the intertidal zone. So in another place, he had a controlled lab experiment. he took the sea star out, all right? And there was a sharp decline in his lab of other invertebrate species. And we can only assume that these very, very low numbers that are between 0 and 5 mostly consisted of mussels. Why? Because the mussel took over and muscled everybody out. Ha ha ha, bad joke. All right. So I'm going to give you guys a link to this, PowerPoint, so that you can take a look at it on your own. And here's another example of a keystone species. Here's another, oh, look at that guy, he's kissing his mom. Here's another example of a keystone species. Okay, so this is just something for you guys to read through, but then here, it tells you about a foundation species, okay? Dominant primary producer that provides food and shelter for many other species, okay? So here's some kelp, all right? And what I would like you to do when you're looking through your article is think about, and you'll know what article I'm talking about in a second. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. I want you to remember that kelp is a foundation species, okay? Remember that because you're going to read about that in your assignment, okay? But basically it means that it's always a producer, okay? Foundation means it's a dominant primary producer, okay? So it's always going to be some kind of plant or algae or plankton or something like that that a lot of other species depend on for food. So like we talked about, the foundation, right? Here's the sea star keeping everybody supported and in check. And here's the kelp, which is a major food source that also keeps the baseline of everything going, okay? And if you're not sure what the difference between a keystone and foundation is, then there are plenty of videos, and I'm going to give you guys a video as well on keystone species. So don't hesitate to look this stuff up on your own if you're confused at all. So here's the effects of losing a keystone predator, all right? A trophic cascade, which I'm going to ask you guys about. In a food web, it's the cascading effect that a change in the size of one population in the web has on the populations at lower levels. So a trophic cascade, remember we have trophic levels 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if you have at the top, your trophic level 4 is this wolf, and if he's not eating the animals that he's supposed to eat because he disappears, then all of the trophic levels get affected. It causes a cascading effect, otherwise known as a domino effect. If you're not 100% sure what the word cascading means, then let's look it up real quick so that we can make sure that we understand, okay? So generally it means a small waterfall typical of several that fall in stages down a steep rocky slope. So when we're talking about the metaphor of a cascade, it means you start at the top, and then if something falls, then it's going to trickle down into a cascading effect. It's going to go all the way from the top all the way down, just like a waterfall. It's going to affect everything. Now, let's get into the assignment on our keystone species, okay? So first, you're going to watch my video, all right? Second, you're going to review the PowerPoint and take notes, okay? So just like the PowerPoint that I just showed you where the starfish needs to eat all those mussels, that you want to make sure that you understand that. And then you're going to watch this video, 3 animals that keep their whole ecosystem together, which is right here, okay? 3 animals that keep their whole ecosystem together. She's going to tell you all about these other keystone species, okay? So she talks about the keystone. She goes over what that means. She tells you a definition, okay? And then she even starts to tell you about trophic cascades, okay? So you're going to answer some of those questions that I have in here, okay? First off, you have these 3 questions. Now, you're going to tell me, what is a keystone species? What is a foundation species? All right? Then you're going to tell me there's 2 reasons why a sea star is a keystone species depending on its geographic location. What are they? So we already talked about one, and I'll tell you about the second one in just one moment. The third question is, what is a trophic cascade? Okay, using complete sentences and the Keystone SciShow video, tell me how the Yellowstone gray wolves' decline, which means their population gets smaller, caused a trophic cascade through the ecosystem. Okay, so you're going to watch this video and summarize the story that she tells you about the gray wolves. How did it affect all of those other organisms? Okay, and it had a very surprising effect. All right, now if you are honors, then you have a 4th question, which you're going to do at the end. But your next step, okay, when you finish these 3 questions and you've watched all those videos and taken notes, this is a good time for a break, okay? Maybe you take a day-long break, maybe you take an hour-long break, up to you, okay? The second half of this assignment, and I noted that in here, I said, good place to take a break if you need one, okay? So don't submit your assignment until you're all the way done, but this is a good place to take a break if you need one. The second part is you're going to read the article, and I gave you all this article, okay? It says that it's 10 pages long. Do not think that it is a crazy long article, because it's not. The reason it's 10 pages is because every sentence or every chunk of the article is this big, okay? So it has numbers for each section of the article. So you're going to go through this, and it's very quick, right? Now we're on page 3, and I'm already on section 10. All right, so it's got a lot of pictures, it's got big quotes, it takes this whole thing and breaks it up into chunks. So this will be a quicker read than you think it will, I promise. But it's got a lot of great information. So you have a copy of this, so you can go ahead and highlight anywhere that you want, okay? So don't hesitate to do that, all right? Now, when you're going through the worksheet, what you want to do is you want to do what's called making a claim, okay? So this says read the article, all right, which you just did, and you want to consider this question. How has the sea star wasting disease affected their ecosystem food web? And basically this is asking you how, just like the Yellowstone wolves' disappearance affected their food web, how is this kind of the same thing, right? So you can make a lot of different claims. You're going to come down here, right? And since you already read the article, you can choose whatever kind of thing that you want from that article to make your claim, right? So maybe you want to say that there are, too many sea urchins, right? So you could say something like that. You could say there are way too many sea urchins, okay? So if that's what you're saying, if that's your claim, then you need to find evidence of that claim, okay? So you could say sea urchins are overpopulated and getting their own diseases. Because what happens when there's overpopulation? Disease, okay? Because there's too many of one thing in one area, too much bacteria, too much opportunity for a virus to take hold, okay? So if your claim is that there are too many sea urchins, then, and you think sea urchins are overpopulated and getting their own diseases, then you want to go back to the article and tell me how you know that. Okay? So let's look through this. Let's find where we know that there's too many sea urchins. Okay? Here's a picture, blanketed of sea urchins. Okay? So they apparently have come out of hiding in the absence of sea stars. They're predators. Okay? And then up here in paragraph 5, it says, we think that there's a wasting event going on with sea urchins. Up here in paragraph 4, it says, in scattered southern seashore pockets from Santa Barbara to Baja California, urchin spines are falling out, leaving a circular patch that loses more spines and enlarges with time. Okay, no one is sure what is causing it. Okay, so we can summarize this. Here's one piece of evidence, right? So if there's too many, we can say in our worksheet, urchins' spines are falling out, similar to the sea star wasting disease. It's not the same virus, but it's a similar effect, right? They're dying, okay? And then you found that evidence in paragraph 4. Notice how I talk about the evidence. I paraphrased. I did not copy. I did not paste. I just quickly summarized what I read. And then I wrote in the paragraph where I found that evidence. Okay? And I want to go through a bunch of different paragraphs. Okay? There are 8 boxes that you can fill out. So I want you to try and do as many as you can. If you only give me 2 pieces of evidence, you're not going to get full credit, okay? I want you to prove to me that you analyzed, you read, and you understand, okay? So here's another claim as another example, another claim that you might want to make, okay? So again, our question is, how has the sea star wasting disease affected their ecosystem food web, right? So if I'm reading through this article, my claim might be about, let's see, otters, okay? Here's an otter eating an urchin. Maybe the otter population could go up because of the urchins, okay? Because there's so much food for these otters. But they talk about, okay, what that means and how much the otters might be eating. And then they also talk about how urchins are grazers, okay? So they are eating kelp, right? So free-ranging urchins may dominate at the expense of kelp. So that could be another claim you make. Maybe you tell me that the kelp population, which is a foundation species, right? A foundation species may be negatively affected. So that could be another claim you make. So those are just a few claims that you could make. So when we're looking at this article, urchins are just one other prey that our sea stars are really in charge of keeping in check, okay? So if you're still watching, then there's your answer for number 2, okay? So we already talked about mussels, right? And then we talked about urchins, which are in the article. Now, this is not the answer in this sort of way, okay? I want you to use complete sentences, right? But these are the basis of that answer, all right? So I just gave number 2 to you in a very short way, all right? So thank you again for watching my videos. Yeah, and like I said, if you're honors, then you have a 4th question at the end, which is I just want you to walk me through how the sea star population decline may be starting a trophic cascade. So you have talked about it using evidence here, but if you're honors, I just want you to be able to tell me about it in like 4 or 5 sentences, okay? Everyone else, you did that with number 3 so that you understand what it even is that I'm asking you about, and then you should be able to slowly walk through it using evidence and claims, okay? So that is it for today with Keystone Species, okay? Do not hesitate to email me or message me with questions, okay? Ask me for help, and we will be talking about this a little more on Thursday in our class meeting, all right? So good luck.